Take this job and shove it.
We are back. This is Jobcast Radio. I am Mike Baumgartner, your Work-Life Survival Sage, Chief Executive Officer of the Work-Life Survival Center, and your host. And on our first segment, we were talking a little bit about Andy, who didn't know what past companies were saying about him. So as we get into this segment, we're going to start talking about interviews. We're going to get back to basics. We're going to start explaining, again, those things you need to know to be able to get a job. So before we do that, it's an important point to remember. Know what is in your past and what past companies or past references are saying about you. I have always said nobody ever gives a bad reference. Nobody has ever given me a reference list of people to call about how good they are, and none of those references have ever given me bad information. But if you're not checking your references, if you're not talking to them and saying, hey, what are you going to say? You may not want to put them on your reference list. Just because they happen to be somebody you worked with doesn't necessarily mean that they liked you. And if you need to test them out, go ahead and do it. So think about that. Know your past so that you are ready for the future. So let's say that you've gotten your resume done. You've gotten a call from a recruiter in the organization. And we're going to break this out into a couple of segments. Number one, we're going to talk about the dreaded phone interview and why companies do phone interviews on the front end. And then the face-to-face interview and how you should present yourself on that kind of situation. But usually, 9 times out of 10, you get a phone call from a recruiter, from an HR person, maybe even the manager of the job saying, hey, I got your resume. I want to talk to you about this particular opportunity. Now, let me tell you a couple of secrets about phone interviews. Number one, we do them because they're cheap. Because it doesn't cost any money. It doesn't mean that I'm driving you in. I'm not flying you in some cases. I'm not having any kind of travel. I'm not tying up anybody's calendar by having you being shuttled from room to room and talking to individuals. We do phone interviews because I want to make sure you're not a nutcase and that to meet the job and just basically how you sound on the phone. And if you sound good and it sounds like you know the job, I'm going to bring you in so we can do a face-to-face. Think of it also this way. There are some other strategies. I also know that people tend to interview over the phone a lot more casually, and they'll say things over a phone that they normally will not say in a more formal face-to-face interview. So you need to think about that. Let's assume that you are doing a phone interview. Somebody's about to give you a call. Number one, if you got noise in the background, you got kids, you got dogs, you got somebody knocking on the door, that immediately tells me you didn't block out the time that we had scheduled just for this interview. If it sounds like you were in the kitchen, the water's running, you just finished the dishes, and we have scheduled this phone interview, I hear the water go off, and then I hear just some noise, and then you settle into the interview, you weren't ready. I want that phone to pick up, and I want to know that you are sitting there waiting for the call and ready to do the phone interview. So some tips for you. If you have an office or if you have a desk, do it from the desk or do it from the office. Dress as though you are going to an interview. It is amazing how well you will behave if you have a shirt and a tie on or a dress or a business outfit. It makes you in the business mindset. If you're wearing your slippers, if you're in a robe, if you're wearing shorts and you've just come back from a game of football or whatever the reason, you're going to sound different on the phone. You're going to be casual. The company, the guy or the woman who is interviewing you is hoping for that. Because as we start getting all friendly in the call, I begin to discover what you really are like. I will ask you far more behavioral questions on a phone interview than I will face-to-face. Now, I'll ask you a few face-to-face because I want to watch your reaction and your body language. But I want to hear on the phone when I start talking about, oh, your past boss and what did you like about him and what you didn't like. You're on the phone. You're gabbing with me. We are instinctively going into that. It's just a cultural thing now. If we are on the phone, and we've been on the phone for maybe 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 minutes, we start to relax. And we start saying things that we really shouldn't say. You need to be on your guard as this interview is happening. Every question will determine whether or not you get or don't get the job. So, shoes, socks. Your hair is nice. You're not wearing slippers. You are dressed well. You block out the time in the day. Make sure that you've gotten some good rest. Make sure that you've got a glass of water nearby so you can take a sip. Do not do anything else while that interview is happening that will distract you. Do not surf the internet. Do not pull your iPad out and just sort of flip through some pages. Do not pull up the news. Do not look at the Drudge Report, at the titles. Anything that's going to distract you is going to read over that phone and tell me you're not serious and you are not the right candidate for the role. I cannot tell you how many times, I kid you not on this, that a candidate has said, hey, I really need to go to the restroom. Can I do that now? If you didn't go before this hour-long interview, what does that say about how you are respecting me? What is even more embarrassing is these several times I have actually heard the bathroom flushing, which tells me you were sitting on the can while I was interviewing you. That's just something wrong. Something very, very wrong about it. And I usually follow up with that noise of, is that noise what I think it is? Do you need to put the phone down so you can wash your hands? But it does happen. And that's why people don't get the job. Dress for success. Focus on what you are talking about. Make sure you've got your resume in front of you. This is the best thing to know about a phone interview, is you can have your notes in front of you. You can have your resume in front of you. If they make a reference to your resume, you can look it up and make sure that you're following what it is that they say, because I'm going to get detailed on the resume, because I want to make sure that you can do the job. The face-to-face interview is about whether or not I like you and whether or not I want to deal with you every day. The phone interview is about, do you know what I expect you to know? If you have technical skills, I am going to ask you technical questions to make sure that you understand it. You should have your resume absolutely in front of you. So if I ask you dates, names, places, people you know, things like that, that's all there in front of you. In a face-to-face interview, yes, you can have your resume in front of you, but I will make a mental note if I keep asking you questions and you keep referencing your resume to find out what I'm talking about, then the resume is not a story about your life. It is probably fiction written by somebody else, and therefore you may not be who I'm looking for or exactly what I want to hire. Another thing. If you are sick, if you have a raspy throat, if you are going to be coughing, anything that is going to tell me that you might be sick, just say it up front. In fact, you may even want to suggest that you move it to another day when you have a better speaking voice. Do not speak quickly. For those of you who get nervous on interviews, there is nothing harder to follow than somebody who is on a phone who is talking exactly this fast. Don't do that. You need to speak. Modulate your voice. If you are normally a monotone person, figure out how to raise and lower your voice so that you don't put me to sleep on the phone. Remember, many times the person who is interviewing you is doing all of the things that I just mentioned to you. Hopefully they're not going to the bathroom while they're interviewing you. However, in Bluetooth technology and with headsets, it's entirely possible. But the person who is interviewing you is looking at your resume, looking at notes, taking notes, maybe occasionally on a long answer surfing the internet, which hopefully they're not, because you need to keep them engaged as well. And you have the upper hand on a phone interview. You really, really do. The only time you don't have the upper hand on a phone interview is when somebody is doing it because they have to, because HR told them that they have to, and they're just doing it so they can just put your name in and then knock you off. You'll know that pretty quick in the phone interview. You can tell if they're not paying attention and they're just going through the motions. That probably means they already have a candidate in mind, and it's not you. Don't take it personally. Remember, when you apply for a job, there's 400 people all doing the same thing, especially if you applied for the job through places like Monster, Yahoo, or any of these job boards. Face it, you need to be able to be professional start to finish. Professional resume, professional background, knowing your history, and a professional phone interview, because the goal of the phone interview is not to get the job. The goal of the phone interview is to get you face to face. Focus on the next step, not on the end goal. I am Mike Baumgartner. This is Jobcast Radio, 304-867-4142. coming up on a hard break, but we'll be back right after these messages. Bye-bye.
Take this job and shut it.